USDA data, concentration for cattle slaughter of these four was only 25% in 1977 and jumped to 71% by 1992. As mentioned today, it is an astounding.
Let's start where this hits closest to home, your grocery cart. The average American family is now spending $1,000 more per year on groceries than they were just 5 years ago. Beef specifically has seen some of the sharpest price increases. Ground beef that used to cost $3 a pound in 2019 is now routinely $6, $7, even $8 at major supermarket chains. Why? The Trump administration held one of the most significant and least covered press conferences of this entire presidency. Standing together were Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, and White House Trade Counselor Peter Navarro. Their subject? Beef. Secretary Rollins laid out the data in stark terms. America now has only 86.2 million head of cattle, the lowest number since the 1950s. In the last decade alone, over 100,000 cattle ranches have disappeared from the American landscape. That's not a natural market shift. That is the result of a deliberate, decades-long consolidation. And here is the number that should make every American furious. 4 companies now control 85% of all beef processing in the United States. Those 4 are JBS, Cargill, Tyson Foods, and National Beef. Half of them, JBS and National Beef, have significant foreign ownership. Peter Navarro didn't mince words about what this means. According to public reporting, he described how these foreign-owned meatpacking companies pour millions into American political campaigns, and the return on that political investment dwarfs anything Wall Street can offer. This isn't capitalism. This is what economists call oligopsony, where a handful of buyers control an entire market, crushing competition, squeezing out small ranchers, and ultimately overcharging you at the checkout counter. And the Trump DOJ, they are now actively investigating whether these companies have engaged in price fixing and market manipulation under federal antitrust law. Secretary Rollins pointed out something historically crucial that most analysts missed. She noted that back in 1977, these 4 companies controlled only 25% of beef processing. By 1992, that number had exploded to 71%. Today, it's 85%. So what happened in the 1970s? On August 15, 1971, President Nixon ended the U.S. dollar's convertibility to gold, what economists call the end of Bretton Woods. This single decision fundamentally changed the American economic system. Instead of an economy built on production, manufacturing, and agriculture, the system began tilting toward financial extraction. When money becomes untethered from real value, it flows to whoever has the most political power to control markets. And so began the Great Consolidation. In the same decade, the oil market was undergoing its own consolidation. The OPEC crisis of 1973, the oil majors expanding control over global supply chains. These were not separate phenomena. They were part of the same structural shift toward commodity control by large institutional actors. The Trump administration appears to understand this connection. That is why, in the same week that the USDA was targeting the meatpacking cartel, the administration was also taking steps on energy pricing and trade tariffs that challenged the same underlying economic architecture. Now let's zoom out to the geopolitical picture, because what's happening with your beef prices and what's happening in international diplomacy are more connected than you think. This week, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney traveled to Armenia for a summit with European and Commonwealth leaders. While there, he made a remarkable admission that what he called the rules-based international order is experiencing a fundamental rupture. His words, as reported in multiple outlets, were striking. He suggested that this order would be rebuilt, but rebuilt around Europe, not the United States. Now, this deserves some careful analysis because Carney is not just a politician. He was the governor of the Bank of England. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada. He has spent decades as one of the world's most powerful central bankers. When he talks about rebuilding an international economic order, he is speaking from direct experience of how that order actually functions. The coalition he is describing, Canada, the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Australia, represents a significant economic bloc. Combined, their GDP rivals that of the United States. The question Americans should be asking is, who does this coalition serve? When the rules-based order is invoked, it typically refers to institutions like the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and agreements like the Paris Climate Accord. These institutions have real power over trade, currency, and economic policy. Trump's America, with tariffs, bilateral trade deals, and energy independence, represents a fundamental challenge to that system. Whether you think that's good or bad depends on your view of whether those institutions have served American workers well. The data on American manufacturing employment, wages adjusted for inflation, and the collapse of the rural farm economy suggests that for tens of millions of Americans, the answer is no. On the same day Carney returned from the Armenia summit, he made a domestic appointment that flew almost entirely under the radar in American media. He named Louise Arbour as Canada's new Governor General. Most Americans don't know what a Governor General does, and that's worth explaining. Canada is a constitutional monarchy. The Governor General serves as the representative of the Crown, meaning the British King. In practical terms, this office holds significant constitutional powers, including the ability to appoint and dismiss the Prime Minister and to command the Canadian Armed Forces. It is not a ceremonial role. It is the most powerful single office in the Canadian constitutional system. So, who is Louise Arbour? Arbour built a distinguished legal career, including serving as Chief Prosecutor of the United Nations International Criminal Tribunals for both the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda in the 1990s. From that platform, she became one of the most influential voices for the creation of a permanent international criminal court, the ICC, which was established in 2002. She later served as the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, the ICC is a deeply contested institution in American politics. The United States has never joined the ICC, neither under Democratic nor Republican administrations. The U.S. has consistently maintained that American citizens, and especially American military and political leaders, should not be subject to prosecution by an international body that operates outside the U.S. constitutional system. The Trump administration has taken this further. In 2025, executive orders were issued placing sanctions on ICC officials after the court issued warrants related to U.S. allies. Carney's decision to elevate Arbour, who built her career championing the very international legal architecture that Trump is directly opposing, to Canada's most constitutionally powerful office, sends a clear political signal. Whether that signal is appropriate or concerning depends on where you stand on international law versus national sovereignty. But ignoring the signal would be naive. Let's bring this back to the most concrete, immediate issue, because international diplomacy can feel abstract. Your grocery bill does not. The Trump DOJ's antitrust investigation into the Big Four meatpackers is potentially the most significant agricultural policy action since the Sherman Antitrust Act era. Here is what they are reportedly examining. 1. Whether the four major packers engaged in coordinated price suppression of what they paid to cattle ranchers while simultaneously raising retail beef prices. This would be a textbook antitrust violation. 2. Whether foreign ownership of JBS and National Beef creates national security vulnerabilities in America's food supply chain. Food security is increasingly being treated by the administration as equivalent to energy security. 3. Whether federal regulations over recent decades have been structured in ways that favored large packers over independent ranchers, effectively creating a regulatory capture situation. For context on what a market correction would mean, in a competitive beef market, cattle ranchers would receive approximately 50–60% of the retail beef dollar. Currently, they receive closer to 37 to 40% according to USDA data. That gap between what you pay and what the farmer receives is where the monopoly profit lives. If antitrust enforcement succeeds, you could see more competitive cattle prices for ranchers, potentially lower retail beef prices for consumers over the medium term, a reversal of the trend that has killed 100,000 American ranching families. Let me connect the dots here, because this is the bigger picture that most coverage misses. The same structural forces that consolidated four companies' control over 85% of American beef processing are the same forces that built the international financial architecture that Carney is now trying to preserve and rebuild. When the Bretton Woods system ended in 1971, capital became more mobile. When capital becomes more mobile, it flows to where it can extract the most value with the least accountability. That means consolidating food processing so you control what farmers receive and what consumers pay. Building international legal frameworks that can override national regulations. Maintaining financial systems centered in global banking hubs that operate above the sovereignty of any single nation. Trump's agenda, whether you agree with it or not, represents a direct challenge to each of these three pillars simultaneously. Antitrust action on food monopolies, withdrawal from or confrontation with international legal bodies like the ICC, tariffs and trade policies that re-anchor economic activity within national borders. This is why the response from the international establishment has been so intense. This is not just about policy disagreements. This is about who controls the fundamental architecture of the global economy. Here's the good news, and there genuinely is good news. Investigations into monopoly pricing take time. Legal processes take time, but they do produce results. The original Standard Oil antitrust breakup in 1911 took over a decade, and it genuinely restructured the American oil market. What you can do right now, first, buy local. The number of farmers markets in America has grown by over 400% in the last 20 years. Direct-to-consumer beef purchases from local ranchers bypass the Big Four entirely. You pay less per pound at scale, and the rancher receives far more. Second, contact your congressional representatives. The House and Senate Agriculture Committees have direct oversight over USDA antitrust referrals. Public pressure matters. Third, stay informed with primary sources. The USDA publishes monthly cattle market reports. The DOJ's Antitrust Division publishes investigation notices. These are public documents. The story of your grocery bill, the story of 100,000 lost American ranches, and the story of a geopolitical realignment happening right now in places like Armenia, they are all the same story. It's a story about who controls the systems that determine how wealth is created and distributed in the modern world. The Trump administration, for the first time in decades, is actively challenging the answer to that question. Whether those challenges succeed, and whether they succeed in ways that actually benefit ordinary Americans, is the most important story of this decade. That's why we cover it, and that's why your attention to it matters. If this video gave you context you didn't have before, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with one person who needs to see it. It genuinely helps us reach more people. I'll see you in the next one.